Morning. I think we're up for a real treat with this first panel, What Really Matters in Employee Satisfaction, moderated by Lydia Dishman from Fast Work Company, reporter there. When we think about employee satisfaction, this is something that we've been working on really hard at Lingo Live for the last 4 or 5 years. We work with multinational employees at mostly at tech companies who typically speak English as a second language, and helping them find their voice in these organizations, something that really does contribute to their sense of employee satisfaction. When we measure employee satisfaction scores over time, we do see a tremendous increase when you can find ways to help people feel like they can really contribute their unique potential in the workplace, which is really difficult when you don't understand necessarily how to navigate the linguistic or the cultural landscape of a company in a country that may be foreign to you and a place that may be foreign to you with coworkers who may be foreign to you. And so it is something that's really important to us. Just listening to the list of companies that was read here about the sponsors, sponsoring things like all the donuts we're gonna eat today. It's really cool that there's so many coaching companies on that list. That really means I think that these companies are really focused on empowering people and investing in the heart of the organization and really trying to find out how to help people contribute their unique self and kind of free themselves of their limiting beliefs. So without further ado, I'm going to allow the panel to come up with the moderator, Lydia Dishman.
Give everybody a moment to file in.
Oh, great. All spaced out.
Wow, this is fantastic. So great to be here. Thank you from day one for giving me this opportunity to lead this discussion. I am super excited. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Are we awake, alive? Everybody had their coffee, paying attention? This is a really important discussion because, as you know, compensation, total compensation, your salary, your benefits, are definitely a huge part of why you take a job. But the reason that you stay is often because you feel like you belong, that you're being recognized, that you're being rewarded not just with dollars, but with recognition. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And so I'm going to ask these fine people to do a lightning round of introducing themselves rather than have me give you a long list of their accomplishments. And also tell the audience about a time that you felt most recognized, or on the flip side, when you weren't and you thought you should have been. So let's start with Chris on the other end.
Great. Hi, everyone. Chris Rotolo. I'm Vice President of Talent Management and Org Development at PepsiCo. And it probably sounds like a better title than it is because it's not all of talent management as you probably know it. My team does all of the major people processes. So it's everything from performance management to leadership feedback, upward feedback, team performance, all of our org surveys, satisfaction and engagement surveys, and culture enablement, and then careers, so our career tools and things. So there's other groups that deal with high potential, succession planning, learning, et cetera. So that's why I say that. And I'd say probably my example, I had to think about this, is not with a PepsiCo example, not to say I don't feel rewarded there or recognized. I'm actually in the process of redesigning. We're telling the boss
right after that.
Our recognition program there, which is exciting. But I'd say probably my proudest moment in my career was way back. I spent some time with the FBI, and I was the third IO psychologist brought in to revamp all of the hiring and promotion practices of its agents because of racial discrimination. And so we got to work with the agent selection system, as well as all the specialty areas like the hostage rescue teams, scuba teams, and things. And it was amazing to see the ingrained biases, I think, that were in those processes. And I'd like to think we made them more objective and fair. Ultimately, it resulted in the Director Award for all that work. So I felt recognized there, as well as kind of achieving something very significant.
So I'm Alex Seiler. I've been in HR or human capital for about 15 years. I have this strange accent, as you can probably tell, and that's because I'm half British and I'm half Swiss, and I was born and raised in Hong Kong. So I always say that makes for somebody to live in New York, where it's a melting pot, and also probably why I'm still in HR, because obviously we work with so many different cultures and deal with so many different perspectives. So I think that's why it's been a natural fit for me. I've worked in a number of different industries. I'm a big believer in diversity of industry and diversity of thought, so everything from financial services to advertising to publishing to healthcare, and most recently WeWork, where I've been heading up HR for the real estate and development function globally, which is about 1,800 people. So as far as a time where I felt really sort of recognized and got a lot of satisfaction, it still sticks out in my mind today, was when I worked in publishing at Time Inc. So when I was there, I actually had a conversation one day with some of the HR leadership, and we had just lost our director of diversity, and I'd mentioned that I'd worked on diversity and inclusion initiatives in the past when I was at Citi and when I was at Ogilvy. A couple months later, they were like, hey, would you like to take on, diversity and inclusion responsibilities for the company? And I was like, that'd be amazing. I think the interesting thing for me there was that was one conversation, and I didn't realize anyone was listening. So I felt super heard and appreciated, right? And because in this day and age, you're like, I have conversations all the time and nobody pays attention. So the fact that I felt heard and they took that under advisement and they gave me those additional responsibilities, I think still to this day, I think I hold them in special regard because of that.
Martha. Hi, I'm Martha Delehanty. I'm the Senior Vice President of HR Operations at Verizon. And thank you for the question, by the way. A couple of things come to mind. And I, too, was pondering when we were preparing for this. And many, many years ago, when I was in graduate school, and I'm going to say a time when I didn't like the recognition, classic woman, these guys are like, oh, here, I'm awesome. No, it's just, anyway, that's a whole different panel, isn't it? Just saying. But I was in, I had a psychology undergrad, and I was in an MBA program, and I was still going debit, credit, and these guys are like, well, I read it in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm going, what's the Wall Street Journal? And, but I got through it, and the second year is when you had to write, and that's where things got a little bit easier, but better for me. And but I was in a leadership meeting, in a leadership class. You had to be selected for it, and the professor had said, if you're ever late, you were kicked. You can't come into the class. And there were other people that were late, but for some reason he decided to pick me out because I was 2 minutes late or something, and the class had to vote. And there was 100 people. It's a classic MBA program, that stupid stuff. But I remember it viscerally. They had to vote, and they voted me to have to leave the class.
You were voted
I'm not
off
a
the
bitch.
island.
At least I wasn't then. But I remember that. And I remember most going into a corner and crying. But I will tell you this, I do remember slugging it out. And there was a piece of the leadership, to get an A, you had to get published somewhere. And that's before Facebook and everything, where it was easy to get published with fake news. And so I did this thing for veterans, and it got on the media, and it got the news. And so suddenly all those people that needed to get that one extra part of the class, were all riding along to get into this media piece. So I think the biggest lesson there was, sometimes the times where it feels crunchy, and the reality of it is I was late. And that professor actually held to his word. I didn't like that he wasn't consistent. And I learned that I'm not made of what other people think of me, but rather how I respond to it. And so that was pretty important. Thanks.
That's a very tough intro to follow. You got laughs, you pulled on heartstrings.
I know. now.
I'm Toby
Go
Harvey.
on, Toby.
Yeah, I'll try. I'm Toby Harvey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bravely. We partner with HR departments to offer employees a new kind of resource, access to coaching in the moments when they need it most. So rather than sort of more traditional executive coaching, everybody gets access and you're put on a new project, or you need to give somebody tough feedback on your team, or you're in conflict with somebody, you can get spot coaching and support through that critical moment that you're going through. And my sort of story of feeling very rewarded and recognized, I was 23 and I started my career at the Guilt Group, and I was in charge of this.
Is that like a day ago?
Yes, yeah, it was last year. Thank you for saying so. And I was in charge of the content for this executive offsite, basically corralling people's slides and making sure they all went together and people weren't duplicating. And for 2 weeks, all I did was obsess and like chase executives around trying to like get them to get me their content for this important offsite. It was a ton of work, and also owned sort of the logistics of it. And 2 days after, I just get this email from the president of Guilt City at the time saying, "Thank you so much for all the hard work. Here's $1,000 spot bonus." And it wasn't about the money, right? After taxes, it was probably like $500 anyway. And I just like the fact that he remembered, like, and he noticed it, he followed up, like he went through whatever approval or decision making he needed to do. And I was like, I will follow this man to the ends of the earth. Like, thank you for seeing me and recognizing all of this effort. Nobody at the company knew, like it wasn't about public recognition. It was just about knowing that people were paying attention to the work that I was doing and appreciated it.
Alyssa.
Hi. Well, thank you for not holding a vote and potentially voting me off the stage here for being late. I really appreciate it. Seriously, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. My name's Alyssa Schaefer, and I'm the CMO of Laurel Road. And Laurel Road is an online bank. We've been in business now for about 8 years or so. And actually, we're recently acquired by KeyBank, one of the larger banks in the country. So it's been an interesting time. And what we do is that we help with student loans and student loan refinance. That's our main product, although we do mortgages and a bunch of other things too. And so I think I might be the only person on the panel who's not deep in the HR space, but we do work with a lot of HR professionals on student loans and student loan benefits. And then in my career, I also had the opportunity to work a tremendous amount with HR as a chief of staff in a couple of my roles previously, so have some experience there. If I can think back to some of the experiences I've had and where I felt recognized and appreciated, I would go back to my previous job, so a few years back, where I worked for American Express Global Business Travel, and it was actually a spin-off of American Express. It was a joint venture, completely separate from American Express, though it still licensed the name. And the culture changed extremely quickly there, from American Express being a spin-off and then setting up its own management team. And it was a pretty tough culture. It was a private equity group that owned the other 50% of the company. And so all the senior leadership team was from the private equity side. And if any of you have had experience in that, sometimes it can be a really tough place to be. And I was brought in to lead marketing for the first time and centralize marketing for the first time. But initially, I was really only brought in to do some work with the US market and to help with lead generation for them. And I guess throughout that experience, it was a tough culture. People were coming, going constantly. I had 8 bosses in 3 years. So it was tough, but throughout that time, I was giving more responsibility. Every 3 to 6 months, my job completely changed to the point where at the end of 3 years, I had all of marketing across 140 countries. I had people in 7 countries, and I was really kind of the CMO of the company. And so I felt extremely recognized that leader after leader, GM after GM, I was able to prove myself. And recognition with more work sometimes is a very good thing.
I gotta say though, like, you know, there's a way to get recognized, but going through 8 bosses, like.
Yes, it was tough.
So what I'm hearing from all of you is there's this sort of first line recognition that happens where you're getting the positive or the negative feedback. So let's talk a little bit about that first, that level of feedback. What have you seen that works in terms of giving and getting feedback? You know, one of the things that is sort of common knowledge out there is that you give negative feedback in a sandwich. You package the not so nice thing in, oh, but you're really great, and oh, by the way, I think, you know, here's a little pat on the back. And so people can get confused as to what they're actually hearing, but maybe that works. So who wants to jump in and talk about feedback? More effective ways.
I'll just mention that, we actually train our managers and leaders not to do the sandwich. Because, what happens is when you do the sandwich is, hey, Alex, you're really great, and blah, 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 and your mind is waiting for the shoe to drop. So that first layer of the sandwich is ignored. So better thing is just to get to it.
Right.
But from a feedback standpoint, we have at PepsiCo, we have a lot of different mechanisms for leaders to get feedback formally. But what we find is the informal feedback that actually has more impact. So we're trying to figure out ways to formally allow the informality.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is I sort of aspire to this sort of radical candor way of thinking, right? So you can be very honest and direct, but still be caring and compassionate. It doesn't mean you need to lose your sort of sense of humanity if you're giving really tough feedback. The other thing is I think we always think about feedback just coming from a boss, from a manager. And I think we need to step away from that thinking. Like, feedback comes from anyone that works with you, right? I had a situation at a pride company where I made the mistake of hiring somebody who I knew, and I never do this, but my team was sort of guilting me into, hey, this position's been open too long, let's hire this person. And within a very short period of time, they were underperforming. And I was giving them very strong feedback. And my team was giving me very strong feedback about them as well, but they weren't giving it to that person, right? And I recognize that peer-to-peer feedback is very difficult, but it's something that people need to get better at doing because it gives that sort of 360 approach. So I think a leader or boss is a key stakeholder in giving feedback, but then not the only person. And I think that's the misnomer.
I think it's a great point, Alex. I just will add to that and say, within my team, not just the current team, but in previous teams I've led, I tend to lean on sort of a couple of key leaders among peers, and they're sort of seen as leaders on the team. And I think people on the team recognize that and kind of go to them and trust them. And I lean on those people too to provide honest feedback, because sometimes it is very uncomfortable to give peer-to-peer feedback, but when there's sort of an informal leader among peers on the team, sometimes that can work even better than coming directly from the leader.
In terms of recognition, though, when you're talking specifically about peer-to-peer, there's nothing quite like having one of your colleagues say, hey, I think you really did a great job in that meeting, or, it doesn't necessarily have to come from high up. How do you see encouraging that in your own workplaces?
So a couple of things. One, back to the sandwich. Just saying.
If we must.
I agree with you with what kind of sandwich it is. Nothing good comes after the word but. Blah, 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 but, all those things. I think the encouragement is one, drive-by feedback never works. And when you create space, and a lot of what we need to do as HR professionals is to create the vehicles and make it really easy. Make it really easy to create a venue and a space to provide that feedback. So people will say, oh, skip levels or whatever you want to call that, or peer-to-peer discussions. Saying that and doing that are two very different things. And so what we've been doing is creating very easy bite-sized meeting in a boxes. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but having an agenda, having a flow of how to do that, presented to the manager and the leader, making it easy for him or her to look like a hero in this conversation. Hey, I just wanted to provide this feedback. And oh, by the way, what I'd like you to do is have 3 other people that you just reach out to in the course of the next month, like seek it out and almost put it out there as a little bit of a game, but also have that as part of an ability to make it your continuous experience, I think shifts the conversation as opposed to, I'm going to give you some feedback now, or it's feedback time, it's that time of year. That never, it doesn't work for me. And the intimacy of, and I know I'm by Verizon, I didn't say what we do, hopefully you know, and you're carrying a phone, it's a Verizon phone. I would say the worst thing to do is to have a phone in your hand when you're actually having a discussion with somebody. That sounds really sort of basic, but I think we've lost some basic humanity of what it takes to, of the gift of the gift of having that feedback.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Toby?
sorry, you go.
No.
No, I was just going to say that, speaking of segue to gift, like, as cliched as it sounds, I feel like it is a gift. And I've told my father that when he annoys me. Because at the end of the day, even if it doesn't work out with an employee, they still know what they need to focus on if they're smart when they go to their next opportunity, right? And I'm a firm believer that you need to receive ongoing feedback so that at the end of the day, it's not a surprise, right? And I would say, as an example of my last company, what I loved is we developed a platform, or we worked with an external vendor to develop a platform called Love. It sounds super hokey, but it's actually really cute. And basically, anyone could go in and recognize any employee that they work with in the company. So it aligned to our values, and you could simply write them a note to thank them. You could award them what we called Bravo points, which then led to like gift cards and whatever. And literally anyone could do it. And each quarter you got an allotment of Bravo points. And it was a really nice way to feel recognized for a good job. And it didn't, well, it cost something because at the end of the day, those points were something. But I mean, it was a recognition, right? And it wasn't just leader-based, like I mentioned before.
We did, I'm sorry, we launched a huge leadership initiative and Leadership Academy and pulled literally thousands of people through. And I actually, from my perspective, thought it was one of those, I don't know, we had badges, but they were buttons. And I thought it was a waste of money, stupid, da-da-da-da-da. And it turns out people coveted these buttons. It was, a caring button. It was a customer orientation button. I spoke up button. And it was that same kind of peer-to-peer acknowledgement that, and I will tell you, it was my bias because it wasn't where I was in my headspace.
Yeah.
And it was important to bring people who were actually receiving the training in because they're the ones that we're going to have to shift.
Yep.
Toby?
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
Toby.
I always look for a small fight to pick on a panel. And I think recognizing people for doing a great job and like sharing praise is like important, but a way easier problem to solve. Like that sounds like an awesome program, but the real problem is how to say the hard things and how do you give critical feedback or like highlight areas of growth or call someone out in a really healthy, productive way on something they're doing that's not serving them well, not serving the team well. And this is like bread and butter, bravely, what we help people with every day. And the biggest thing that we see is that people just challenge with the how. Like, what are the literal words that are going to come out of my mouth? How am I going to say it without stumbling and my lip quivering? How am I, especially when there's a power imbalance and it's sort of like lateral feedback or you're trying to give feedback to your boss. And so in our Bravely sessions, we're talking about, is there more context you can give to explain why you're coming from? Can you make it more observational, objective behaviors or things that you've seen? Let's practice what you're going to say. Let's role play. As uncomfortable as that is, the more times you say it out loud to me and we could talk about how people might react to the different things that you're saying, the more comfortable you'll be in that meeting. Yeah. And so that's like, great feedback. Like, you killed it in that meeting. Your presentation was so tight and sharp. Like, that's the easier part, right? And we want to have a culture of that celebrates those wins. But the more important thing for driving employee satisfaction, engagement, is being able to say the things that are really hard to say.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because Bravely is a technological way to tackle this problem. How many of you have Slack in your offices? Does anybody use Facebook Workplace? Okay. And other chat type things to just talk peer-to-peer? So most people know about this, and I think it's interesting the way that Slack has become a verb, like Google. These type of communication platforms have enabled very rapid response to situations in the office, but also enabled a level of conversation that we really didn't have before. When was the last time that you messaged your boss an emoji? But now it's perfectly acceptable to do so. But I think that at the same time, technology may have taken away some of the human empathetic aspect of communication and recognition. What do you all say to that?
So, you go.
No, I was just going to kind of bridge to the last topic. I think you're spot on, because if you boil down the feedback element of doing it and doing it well, you think of what relationships where it's natural. It's with your best friend. It's with maybe even your family. And there's this element of empathy and assuming positive intent that kind of breaks those barriers of difficulty to give those challenging messages. And so whether it's virtual or online or in person, if you have that relationship of positive intent and empathy, then the mechanics are much easier. So I'm not getting at your last question exactly, but I think what we're seeing, and I see a lot of companies starting to focus on cultures of empathy, assuming positive intent as kind of a core to leadership fundamentals, and which is not an easy thing to build from a muscle standpoint.
And I think that's so important because to kind of pull your question together with your comment, I don't think that technology, at least as a leader or as an employee, has gotten in the way of kind of that human element necessarily, but I think that there is a big risk using technology that something will be misinterpreted or assumed.
Absolutely.
And so, focusing on that empathy and assuming positive intent is really, really important when you're using all of these tools, that it's so easy to read something and to infer what the tone of the email or the message said when it may be a totally different tone than what was meant.
Yeah, sure.
There's also this assumption of things that, how many times have people seen the ... and then suddenly your mind goes, and the rest of the story is, and you don't even know, or ... and then nothing is said. And it could literally be they were in the bathroom. I don't know what it was, but all of this crap that goes on in your head. And I was just outside in the Philippines last week with some team members there, and the cultural challenges within digital and text. It's the commercial model as well as the employee model of what a caps mean here versus, okay with an explanation point, for me is I'd be irritated if somebody sent the okay explanation point versus in this area it was like okay. And it's all of that misinterpretation. And so what I think that concept of positive intent is an important piece because there's a lot of headspace that happens. Absolutely. And misinterpretations that happen within technology far more I've seen than happen with face-to-face.
Sure.
Alex,
please. I was just going to add that putting my HR hat on, Slack and Instant Messenger make me nervous as well because it's got to a point of oversharing. I think Slack and Instant Messenger are great if it's like a quick note, a quick message, meet me here, but people have started writing novels on Slack. Like the amount of things I've seen on Slack, and I'm like, could you just email me that? Or could we maybe have a meeting on that? Because it's, and part of it, I don't necessarily want to say it's millennial generation, but it's like, please don't share merit information via Slack. Please don't tell me about an employee relations issue via Slack. So I also think there's some education around how to use these channels in the right way and when to have a conversation and when to send something by Slack. Mm-hmm.
Is there a potential, it's a better entry point? Somebody might be more comfortable sending you a Slack about something sensitive as a door opener, and then it could lead to that?
I agree with that. Yeah. But then that's an easy way to kind of cut that conversation short and say, let's move this to a conversation. Mm-hmm. But you don't necessarily have the choice if their first one is, so here's a data dump of information, and here we go. So provided there's that entryway.
So to me, there's an opportunity to educate people, for the different things that you have going on. These are ways to think about communicating. To me, Slack is just another chess piece in the game of communication and thinking about who needs to know what, when, in what order to set something up for success, to resolve a problem or get something done. And there are people who better communicate via Slack or feel more comfortable as a starting point via Slack or love to get feedback via Slack because they want to process and react and think about it. And as long as there is that follow-up conversation to then dive deeper on it. I had somebody on my team, she did a presentation, she's just amazing across the board, but I had all these thoughts on how she structured the slides and was presenting this information. And right after I was like, hey, real quick, why don't we talk through these slides? And I'm sort of walking her through it. And she just started crying. And I like to think I'm nice. And these were all good things. And I asked her, I was like, it doesn't seem like this is working for you. She's like, I would have loved all of this via an email, via Slack, so that I could think about it and work through it and then talk about it. And it was a great learning moment for me. Different people process information in different ways, and Slack opens up a new way to give people information if that's a great way that they receive it or need it or want to be able to process it. And again, going forward to HR can be really intimidating about things. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's cheating a little bit to rely on the separation of the screen to say something that's tough, but maybe that actually means you get more information or somebody comes forward earlier as a result.
I don't disagree with you, but a counterpoint is I think you're giving certain people a lot of credit, and I think sometimes it's also a question of people are just moving so quickly that they don't want to invest in the conversation. So it's way easier to send a Slack message.
Yeah, that's
True.
and that's another thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about answering this question myself, which I will not be doing. But I do think that the technology affords us a way to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff as well. You're focusing on maybe the top tier employee, somebody who's a real high performer, or the lowest performer. And so people in the middle tend to get nothing if we're consistently relying on electronic communications or just a drive-by recognition.
Yeah.
So what are you all seeing in terms of how to recognize and uplift that mid-level employee that's just, heads down, waiting for the meritocracy to lift them up?
This is a great, I can't agree with you more. It's the big middle, and it's actually where all the work gets done. And we always spend all this time on high po, or low po. And then there's, again, the big middle. And how do we shift? Something that we've done, which is called, it's actually a women's initiative, and a broader perspective is that we've actually put applications out for folks, for people it's a program called WOW, thousands of people actually applied. And that's scary from an HR perspective because you're going to decline thousands of people because there's so many slots. It's been a really interesting way to, one, open up that opportunity to everybody, and then to build in the plan to have a conversation with those declined, and let's talk about your application, and those that have been accepted from that perspective. So it's not this focus, I've tapped you on the shoulder, it's not about HR controlling the development, but it's HR providing the platforms to enable the development and have some more democratization across this piece. I actually think that's one of the most important and profound ways to ignite the big middle. You have to be willing, though, to have folks that are in the big middle shine. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, our headspace from a human capital perspective is not there. And I'd argue that's where all the work and all the value is created. Sorry for all the hypos in the room, but without, me in the big middle, no. But seriously, so it's something, an application approach has been really cool, not nearly as scary, hard on the business partners, nevertheless, but has been a really cool way to ignite opportunity.
I mean, this is so up our alley,
I
as we were talking about
know.
right before the panel, right? The idea is that a lot of special programs, learning development programs, access to coaching, like people are sort of cherry picking high potentials, or you get promoted to a certain level and you get access to it. But if you could equalize access to different resources where people can self-manage and self-direct to learn and grow and seize a key moment in their life at work, then you can help people advance when they really want to, especially when you think about the bias that goes into these selection processes for different high potentials and promotion tracks. There's a lot of overlooked talent out there because they may not look or talk or socialize like you. And by equalizing opportunities to learning or applications and promotions, advancement or coaching, we can help the talent that really wants to seize that opportunity take the next step.
I'm glad that you mentioned coaching because not every company offers leadership development, for lack of a better word, and they don't often offer the same benefits across the board in general, nor should they. And I'm thinking about benefits as another way to recognize not just the high and low po. Thank you for this new word that I learned today.
We call it Alpo.
Alpo, okay. Dog food, anyone?
Just kidding.
But just across the board, how are you seeing the benefits and perks packages change to become more of a recognition tool? I know that, for example, flexible work is top of mind for not just millennials, but every generation in the workplace. if you are able to take flex time to be a caregiver, that's a huge deal. So what else are you seeing, Alyssa?
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of interest from companies and HR departments in particular around student loans. This is really what we do, and I don't think that it's just because of what we do that there's been so much traction. It's been very well covered in the media, just the prolific challenge that student loans can be for particularly millennials, but even parents now too that are taking out loans for their children. It's actually the second debt category in the whole country now, second behind mortgage, and it just surpassed credit card debt. So $1.6 trillion, and actually it's a whole separate panel as well, but 2/3 of that debt is actually held by women. So I think student loan debt is certainly something that comes up quite a bit. We work with employers directly. We also work with a lot of benefit providers, and so the benefit providers will come to us and say, hey, we need to talk about student loans. So we do a bunch of things from refinance to enabling employee contributions if that's something that they want to do. But that is certainly something that is coming up more and more. And I think it is a little sensitive because it's not a benefit that is, benefits every single person in the organization. Sure. But it's such a prolific issue. I think many HR leaders now are saying, okay, it may not benefit everybody, but there's so much demand that we have to do something.
Sure. Trends? Anyone?
Sorry, I was just going to say that in my last company, what I appreciated was, to your point, 360s and leadership coaching usually in the past has happened at the leadership, the executive level, or for hypos, if we're going to use it now too. But what we started doing, and seeing more of, is starting it for newer managers, right? People who are at that sort of manager, senior manager level. So they're actually sort of learning the right behaviors, like out the gate, versus learning those behaviors from their managers, right? So, and it's an added incentive for them, because a lot of the times we move people into managerial positions and we don't set them up for success because we don't give them the tools to be successful. So I'm seeing more and more of that, so that, it also cuts down sort of that amount of manager development training. It's such a buzz these days, right? So I think that's been super helpful, and people see it as additive and a form of investment as well.
I was just going to add, we're pretty much probably trying to take a lesson from smaller companies, which is, mass customization of compensation and benefits, because every person has a different backstory, right? And so somebody may need flex time, other people may need more help with their student loans, and so on and so forth. And so how can we give managers the ability to, flex that reward and their comp package, benefit package, as part of recognition for job well done and kind of thing. So we haven't cracked the nut on it, but we're trying to say, okay, what should be, equal amongst everyone, but what should be mass customized? Because, in the past, it's been one size fits all. And I think we're in a day and age where that just doesn't work.
Lydia, you mentioned belonging in your intro, and I think that is just like a pillar of employee satisfaction or the employee experience, and whether you have a good one or not. Do I belong here? And beyond sort of thinking about performance and tough conversations at work, like your benefit strategy sends a strong signal about like the kind of people that belong here, the kind of things that we provide for you in your personal life that are related to your life at work, because nothing is separate. Fertility benefits, right? Like we want people to be parents here. We want people to start families. If you have a family, we support you. And as a company, like we want your perspective and we value you. EAP, like robust EAPs, right? Access to mental health services. Like we all have different times in our lives where we might need support, some of us all the time. And that's okay. Like if you have something going on, like we want to support you in that. Flexible work, right? Like we want people from a bunch of different backgrounds, a bunch of different needs throughout their life, and this is a place for you to work. And so your benefits, I think, are a big part of that message.
Yeah, for sure. Back to the belonging issue as well. What about a company's mission and values? Of course, that's wrapped into some benefits, but how important is that to foster recognition and belonging? What are you seeing at your companies?
I'd say it's the key element in a strong employee value proposition, and it's the biggest shift we've seen. And it's not just for millennials, but the biggest element of my work matters, and understanding what that question is, where I fit into the broader history and the future of the company and how my work fits into that. We historically assumed people understood that, and that has been a comprehensive surround of our EVP, and I believe will become a growing piece. I don't think, comp and bens are complete table stakes. I don't totally buy that because I do think there's a motivational factor. But I absolutely believe the discretionary contribution that we're all seeking around our employees, which what makes somebody, lean in and jump out of bed to come to work as opposed to suck it up and come to work. I mean, that's the whole holy grail, is the my work matters. And building out, we have a new CEO, and Hans is really building in that broader purpose driven. And so we talked about this, and besides, it's no longer about, okay, yeah, we have a foundation and we have money and this is what it's for. It's really inherently the fundamental foundation of, building 5G and delivering, the technology that's going to power the fourth industrial revolution. And the question will be, do you see hope or do you see demise in the fourth industrial revolution? It's a very important question because there's the digital divide, there's the bots and things like that. And our job is to, one, make sure people understand, one, that's what you're building, and two, there's huge hope, but there's huge opportunity as we see that. That's a big shift for us.
Well, I'm going to stop there because I do want, in the last few minutes, to do sort of a lightning round. If the audience has any questions, burning questions for this panel, we have a couple of minutes left and we can take a couple of questions. Anyone like to ask anything? Oh, come now. Surely you have burning questions. There we go. There's a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah.
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 Great question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll touch on it.
She was asking about, there's been a lot of talk about feedback and how do you hold people accountable to make sure that it's actually happening rather than just doing like annual reviews.
Yeah, so I love the question, first of all, and I think it really comes down to whether the company you work for has a culture of accountability. And I'll be honest, I've worked at both, where they walk the talk, and others where they just talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So I think, as cliche as it sounds, it starts at the top, right? And you've got to have a culture of accountability where people recognize good behaviors and call out the bad behaviors, right? And there can't be a sense of favoritism or treating people differently. There's got to be a consistency around it. And I think management has to be aligned to that culture of accountability, right? And I'll be honest, when I talk to different companies, one of my first questions is, do you have a culture of accountability? What does that look like, right? So it's got to start at that level, because if it's not there at the top, then leaders below won't. There's no incentive or reason for them to actually hold their people accountable.
I think that that's very true, but I would like to just counter that a little bit and say, I think one of the good things of the travel company that I was a part of, where I said there was a little bit of a crazy culture there for a while, one of the good things that they did was they instilled this point of, it's not just top down, because it absolutely is 100%, but it's also employee-led and initiated too.
Yeah.
And there was a quarterly process where the email went out and everything to sort of kick off the process, but it was the employee that was responsible for saying, I want to have this conversation, and it wasn't a mid-year or year-end formal review. It was a quarterly informal feedback session, and 3 questions were asked of the manager. What am I doing well? What should I stop doing? And what should I focus on for the next quarter? And it was up to the manager to, of course, have that conversation and in a detailed way, make sure that manager got the right feedback. But it was employee-led, and I thought that was actually really brilliant, because it 100% needs to start from the top, and the accountability is on the leader, but it's also on the employee, which is not a message that a lot of employees are used to hearing, or at that point were used to hearing. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to drive both points home.
I don't think they're off the hook, essentially. It's a two-pronged process, essentially. So.
Can I just add, too, that I would take a holistic look at the role of HR in that equation, because quite often we say, okay, we need to hold managers accountable. So what do we do as HR? We say, okay, it's time to go fill out this form, right? Do it by X date, okay, then
Check.
do this next step. And so we become the police.
Yep.
And, you know, if you ask yourself, if you were to take away a process, would managers still use it? Or would leaders still use it? And if the answer is no, they don't see value in it.
Yep.
And so how do you create that accountability through value? And again, there's no magic formula for that, but to me, that's the best way to go, even though our instinct is to over police it.
That's about all we have time for as the clock runs down. Thank you all. Please give it up for our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lydia, and all the speakers. We'll be